Let's speak now to Amnon Aran. He's a senior lecturer in international politics of the Middle East at London's City University and has a special interest in the Arab-Israeli conflict. He joins us now via Skype. Sir, thank you for joining us here on Al Jazeera. We've just been watching an upsetting report with upsetting scenes showing how we are seeing an increase of intercommunal violence. First of all, do you see this as a significant difference steps to similar clashes that we have seen in the past?
Yes, absolutely. In the history of Israel, I think these are really unprecedented interethnic clashes. The closest that Israel has witnessed were, as your reporter stated, clashes that preceded or were in the eve of the Second Intifada or the Al-Aqsa Intifada. But these are certainly unprecedented in their scale, in the intensity of the violence, and also in the spread between various cities. Absolutely.
I mean, obviously, we're seeing the attack on Gaza and the rockets coming out of Gaza as well. But do you think that this goes beyond it, that perhaps at the root of this is also many of the political changes that we have seen in the Knesset itself and the emboldenment of a lot of far-right Jewish extremists?
Yes, absolutely. I think these intercommunal clashes really have two levels. There's a long-term level to them, which includes a very prolonged social and economic neglect of Palestinian Israelis by successive Israeli governments. Of course, there is, to add to that, the political marginalization of Palestinian Israelis, not least the passing of the nationhood law that was passed a few years ago, which defined Israel as a country that is exclusively for its Jewish population, in departure from Israel's own declaration of independence. So that has been a long-term process that has been happening for a long time now. But then, of course, there are the short-term processes that really, I would say, brought this tinderbox to explode. One is the ongoing interest and determination of Jewish settlers to evict Palestinian families from their neighborhood in Sheikh Jarrah. And of course, compounding that was the reckless and very violent conduct of the Israeli police during what is called Jerusalem Day in Israel, and of course, during the Friday in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And to add fuel to that fire, we have the recent election of Jewish racist party called Religious Zionism, whose leaders are disciples of the late Rabbi Kahana, who was in fact ousted, outlawed from being elected in Israel because of his calls back in the 80s to evict, to transfer forcefully Palestinian Israelis. And that elections and the active participation and fueling by Israeli parliamentarians have certainly heightened the flames of the fire and of these intercommunal clashes.
And speaking of elections, Israel has seen quite a few in the past 2 years, and they have been inconclusive. I mean, they were in the process of possibly forming a new coalition when the violence erupted. Where do you think that leaves the situation now? Is there a risk that whoever is in government could lose control of the situation in many of the towns?
Yes, there is a real risk of losing control. You're right to say that having 4 elections in 2 years has certainly left a policy vacuum. And therefore, into that vacuum entered these vigilante groups, these racist groups. But at the moment, the interesting thing is that we still don't have a government in Israel. Mr. Yair Lapid, the head of There Is a Future, still has 20 days to form his own government. But in the context of the current crisis that we are in, Mr. Naftali Bennett, who up until last week was part of a conversation that now almost seems surreal, namely of a Jewish government together with the southern faction of the Islamic movement in Israel, headed by Mansour Abbas, was still under discussion. Now Mr. Bennett said that he's not part of that and he's not going to form any government in that context. So we're back, in a sense, to the drawing board, and it is not entirely unplausible that Israel will be heading to a 5th election amid this very profound crisis. Having said that, Mr. Netanyahu has a higher chance of forming a coalition than he did last week.
Amnon Aran, senior lecturer in international politics of the Middle East at London's City University. Sir, thank you for sharing your views with us.
Thank you.